Welcome everyone to ProductTank's Birmingham July event. My name is Matt and I'll be your host tonight. I'm joined by my co-organizers Neve and Janice. Neve is joining me here in the live stream. Just gave you a wave, and Janice is on the front end helping to facilitate conversations in the chat. Our guest today, of course, is Bill Wagner, who I'll introduce shortly. Thanks for the wave there, Bill. If you could share the deck with us here. There it is. I will introduce ProductTank to everyone. We'll welcome Neve and Bill back in a moment. So get in touch with us if you'd like. Bill, if you could move to the next slide, please. ProductTank, as an introduction, is all over the world. We've expanded to become the largest product community by product people for product people over the last decade plus. As a part of ProductTank, we work with Mind the Product to further the mission of helping product people be more successful. Mind the Product offers loads of help in building your product skill set, including courses and things. If you can move to the next slide, please, Bill. Covering topics from prioritization to stakeholder management and also conferences. So the next conference is scheduled for October 21st to the 22nd, and it will be available fully digitally with the option to attend in person on the 22nd in London if you're in the area and would like to attend an in-person conference for the first time in ages. I'm going to bring Bill back into the stream here to introduce him to you so he can give his presentation. So Bill is an experienced business and thought leader who is passionate about driving growth by creating great experiences for customers. His experience includes product portfolio management, corporate and competitive research, communication strategy, brand platform management, data science, and e-business. So currently he is the president of Penta Technologies, a software company serving the construction industry. And he is responsible for leading Penta's long-term strategy, product portfolio, and demand generation activities. He does that by focusing on development solutions that solve the big challenges for that industry. And today I'll present which Top Gear personality are you when driving your roadmap. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Bill. Take it away.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for making it all the way through that wordy introduction that I wrote for you. We'll talk about that in a minute, actually. The fact that my introduction is so long, I think dovetails really well with some of the framing for this presentation. So as Matt mentioned, we're going to go through a slide deck here with some examples. I'm going to try to keep it light, fun, try to keep the pedal to the metal, pun intended, and get through all of my material so that we have extra time for Q&A. And then we'll bring Matt and Neve back in at the end. They're going to talk about upcoming events, and they'll help facilitate the Q&A. If anybody's got any questions throughout the presentation, just throw them in the chat thread. We can all see them, and we'll go through the questions at the end when we get into the Q&A section. So if Matt's introduction wasn't enough, let's talk for a second about who I am, where I'm coming from. As Matt mentioned, I'm currently the president at Penta Technologies. We're a company that makes ERP and accounting and productivity software for the construction industry, primarily in English-speaking countries, with a real focus in the States. I'm actually in Milwaukee, Wisconsin right now. I do a lot of presentations. I do a lot of webinars. I've had the good fortune of being asked to share my experiences as it relates to product management and portfolio management a fair bit over the last couple of years. A couple of the areas where I like to share my experience in that agile transformation space, scaling up your product team, ways to think about adding to your business's capabilities and products, and then strategic positioning for your product portfolio, which is a part of this roadmap presentation. I actually came up through the strategic marketing part of business. I've been at this for a little bit more than 25 years. Again, another area where I like to think I had some good fortune. I started in this back in the early days before the internet was really a thing, upending and impacting all of our best laid plans for how we're going to grow our businesses. And I like to think that that gives me the luxury of being able to talk about topics like road mapping through a really long time scale of 25 plus years, because things have changed a lot in 25 years as it relates to this part of the product management discipline. The other thing I like to do, I like to use a lot of analogies. And so usually when I do a presentation like this, I'll try to come up with some type of analogy or analogous device that we can use to maybe frame the problem space a little bit differently. And, given the fact that I was going to be presenting to a bunch of folks in the UK, my initial inclination went to something I know and love, which is to use an analogy of football. But then the events of the past couple of weeks happened, and I decided, no, let's back away from the football analogy. Nobody wants to talk about this. The one thing I will share with the audience, I feel your pain. I'm a Poland fan. We have the best goal scorer on planet Earth right now, and we couldn't even get out of the group stage in the Euros. So, could have been worse for you guys. At least you made it to the finals and you were interested all the way down to the last kick. Instead, the analogy device that I wanted to use for this presentation are the three presenters from the UK motoring program Top Gear, because I think there are aspects of the way these three guys present their personas on the show and in public life that will illuminate some different ways to think about the road mapping process as a product owner or product manager. We'll get back to these guys in a minute, though. What I want to talk about first, and this is where I want to loop back through my wordy introduction that we provided the ProductTank team. Product management is a really difficult discipline in modern business. You're in the center of a lot of different activities, and you typically have accountability and responsibility for a lot of teams. Yet in most modern agile organizations, there is not a robust reporting structure where there's sort of infrastructure in place to create hardcore black and white accountability to the product owner, right? In a lot of agile shops like Penta, we embrace this idea that the product manager or product owner is responsible for organizing the backlog, bringing the outside world into the business, and maximizing value by directing the activities of the development team. They're usually assisted in this activity by a whole bunch of people that are on this slide, right? We've got executive leadership team and stakeholders should be involved, providing the connective tissue to the larger business strategy. Your dev team is responsible for coming up with the what, the actual solution to the user's problem. If you're lucky, you've got a solid scrum master or some type of project management function that helps you keep all of the different activities on schedule and on budget. And then you have all of these other external stakeholders, including your user community. You'll typically have people that are selling the product, people that are supporting the product, people that are managing all of your customers. It's a lot to manage, which is why the best representation that I've been exposed to in my career of what a quote unquote full stack product manager does is the pragmatic marketing framework. And there's a lot of stuff in the pragmatic marketing framework that a product manager is supposed to be able to master, right? And it goes from sort of the higher level outside of the business all the way to the actual detailed brass tacks of supporting an existing product. And the way I like to think about the pragmatic marketing framework is product managers are really responsible for three main areas. You've got the strategy things that you're supposed to master, you've got the technical things you're supposed to master, and you've got sort of the marketing and support of the product things you're supposed to master. And that can be a lot. And I think that that's one of the reasons why roadmaps over time have become such a heavy concept in a lot of businesses that are engaged in the act of building products. Another way to look at the responsibilities of a product owner, and this is more informed by what I do currently as an executive in a company, I like to tell product owners and product managers, You're responsible for planning your products, forecasting your products, producing your products, marketing your product, and supporting or maintaining the users of your product with the objective of maximizing sales revenue, market share, and profit. So really, the product manager is the general manager who's responsible for the part of the business that is attached to the product they're responsible for. It is a lot. It is a difficult job for people in 2021. And I don't think that this is the type of discipline that's about to get any easier. I think that the difficulty of juggling or wearing all these different hats is one of the things that leads to people taking some interesting approaches to the way they leverage a roadmap as a tool to help them manage all of these disparate responsibilities. And so to bring the Top Gear presenters back into the presentation, I've attached some labels to the three gentlemen. I think Richard Hammond is the sentimentalist. He's always the guy that gets emotionally attached to some old beat up car whenever the Top Gear folks do a challenge. Clarkson is more of your entrepreneur, right? He's the wild and crazy guy who's constantly iterating, and he doesn't really think about the plan all that much. And then James May is definitely the perfectionist. He's the type of guy where if he were a product owner, he would spend 95% of his time in his office obsessing over his very detailed roadmap that stretches out 3 years into the future because he thinks you can plan for everything. We're going to keep these three personas in mind as we talk through my personal experience with the concept of road mapping and the way that's evolved over time for me and for the teams I lead. And so the next slide here, we're looking at, a typical roadmap. I think I grabbed this from one of the road mapping software vendors' websites. And so, this one is time bound and it looks a lot like a Gantt chart. And it appears to be a bunch of feature releases with Gantt chart bars that articulate how long the development team is going to be working to develop these features. We've got some launch milestones along the top edge of this. And you can see along the left-hand side, we've got, self-service, mobile, web store, help desk, infrastructure, all different ways to conceptualize the buckets of features that are being developed by the development team. In my talks with product managers, when people build roadmaps like this, it seems to me, and this is fairly consistent when I give this talk or when I talk to people that are engaged in road mapping, that between the development of what we're looking at, a roadmap that looks like this, and the actual execution of said roadmap, very frequently things do not unfold according to plan. And so whenever I get involved in this road mapping dialogue with a group of product managers, I always like to push everybody back to some basics. And I say, okay, it would be great if we all lived in a world where we could dump all the information into a road mapping tool and there was some magical way that we could keep all of these disparate resources that don't functionally report to us on schedule, on time. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we lived in a world where software development could unfold, where no one ever steps on a landmine or gets surprised by something we've never done before, taking way longer than we originally expected or costing more money? So why are we investing so much time developing these roadmaps if they very infrequently unfold according to plan? And so I ask a few questions. I say, why do we roadmap? Well, the roadmap should be a tool for the product manager. The roadmap ideally would help you drive alignment with your stakeholders, right? The people that have to cut the checks to pay for the activity, the people who are very desperately awaiting the day when these features that you're spending money building are going to turn into actual profits for the firm. A good roadmap, you would hope, would also help you drive your product vision with the team. And the team could be your development team or the broader team, right? It could be a great tool to keep your salespeople aligned, or your account managers, or to keep customer support one step ahead of the next release so they could develop the tools to help your customers. It should add some project management scheduling tools in the mix, right? I think that's one of the great hopes that we all have for the roadmap, is that it's going to be able to be used as a release management tool or a resource allocation tool. And then we also, I think, roadmap, because we live in a constant state of chaos as product people, and this illusion of control by putting everything onto a piece of paper is really quite a seductive concept for a lot of people. The other reason I think people invest so much time in road mapping is there's this myth that it's going to give us a shield against all the people that are holding us accountable for things unfolding according to plan. Well, I've got this roadmap and it articulates the way I expected everything to happen. I'm going to give you the illusion that I am in control of all of this stuff, when in reality, I find that that's quite frequently not the case. So how do most of us roadmap? Well, a lot of us use tools, right? And I've seen people successfully build roadmaps with everything from Microsoft Excel to, purpose-built online product planning tools like Product Plan and AHA. I've used all of these at various points in my career. Another thing that we'll typically do on a regular basis as product managers, we'll do the brain dump exercise, right? We'll get everybody in a room. We'll start filling up whiteboards. We'll start iterating Post-it notes that represent epics or user stories for things we can add into the product. We'll try to get that stuff organized into some type of rough plan before we translate it into the road mapping tool. We'll typically prioritize. And I've seen people prioritize in all manner of ways, right? What's it going to take to get us to an MVP? What are the things that are most technically feasible? Let's get those done and knocked out of the way first while we think about the hard stuff. Let's do it based on cost, because we're really concerned with our cash burn inside our business. Let's do it based on stakeholder input, because the stakeholders rule the roost inside our company and they get to decide what the priorities need to be. Maybe you do it based on user research. Maybe you do it based on what your competitors are doing. Maybe you do it based on gut feel. Maybe you do it based on some overarching vision for something you want to get to that you think is going to open up a huge market opportunity. And what I would ask is, you're investing all of this time and all of this mental energy trying to wrangle all of this stuff into some plan that we can all honestly admit to ourselves is probably not going to unfold according to the way you line it up in the roadmap. So the question I would ask everybody when you're engaged in this process and you find that you're spending a lot of time engaged in these types of activities, are you trying to build a product or are you trying to build a roadmap? And I've run across what I would consider bad product managers who are trying to build a roadmap, and that's prioritized in their mind ahead of trying to build a product that's going to delight a bunch of users. So a way to protect yourself against this is to be really specific with your roadmap. Who is this roadmap for? And does this roadmap, if I reduce it down to using this roadmap as a tool for just this one audience, is the roadmap an effective tool for communicating what I want it to communicate, right? So if it's for your stakeholders, would you use your roadmap as a venture capital presentation? Because I would submit you probably wouldn't. You would have more of a higher level financial conversation with a venture capitalist. That's probably a better tool to manage the conversation with your executive stakeholders. How about your developers, right? Is your roadmap any better than a well-ordered, well-described, well-understood backlog? I would submit that it's not. Is it for the salespeople? Because you could get away with just giving them a release plan, right? Is it for yourself? I would say, like, aren't you busy enough? Why do you need to invest in developing one more artifact? So my thesis behind these types of roadmaps is to quote a really famous person from the UK, is that plans are of little importance, but the act of planning is essential. And then to follow up this quote from Winston Churchill, I'm going to marry it up with a quote from somebody from the States, Mike Tyson, who said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth, right? And I'm going to talk for the last 5 minutes to 10 minutes of this presentation about ways to embrace those 3 Top Gear personalities as a way to think about the the road mapping exercises that you're all engaged in right now. And I'm also going to share a couple of ways to maybe simplify the investment you're making in the act of road mapping. So let's start with Clarkson, right? The entrepreneur. Flying by the seat of your pants is still flying. And I think Jeremy Clarkson would tell you that. Is like, as long as the car functions and it's able to move forward, he's going to drive it, and he's going to drive it like he stole it, right? This is a great way to think about the unexpected, the nonlinear. There's a really smart marketing professor from the United States called Saras Sarasvathy, who around 10 to 15 years ago studied entrepreneurs. And she found that entrepreneurs have a consistent mechanism by which they think about the world. And that system actually looks almost exactly like the agile development cycle. Entrepreneurs are great at taking really small slices of the problem, solving it with an MVP, and then seeing what happens. And only after they get that feedback on a really tight feedback loop do they worry about planning the next thing. Jeremy Clarkson is not the type of product owner who would build a roadmap that's going to stretch even 6 sprints out into the future. He's concerned with the now and maybe the tomorrow. And what he's doing, instead of investing time trying to plan for an uncertain future, he's actively listening for what the market is telling him about the thing he did yesterday. And I would ask all of you to embrace a little bit of your inner Jeremy Clarkson when you find that that roadmap is stretching out beyond 6 months. Because I've got news for you. Unless everybody in your company is sandbagging and is overestimating what it's going to take, 6 months out on your roadmap is probably not going to unfold anywhere near what you think it's going to unfold like. And so why bother putting all that stuff on a piece of paper? Now, that said, there are times when you need to embrace your inner perfectionist like James May. There are times when you need a detailed plan, but in my experience, I have found that most often that detailed plan is not for the product development activity. The product development activity can function with a much lighter weight, more agile, iterative plan. The reason you have to come up with a detailed plan for the future is because you're having to coordinate resources that are not moving at the pace of your agile development group. Your marketing department might need a year to schedule a trade show booth. Your salespeople might need a month and a half to tighten up their call sheets and their product pitches. In those instances, I think the roadmap can sometimes be a really poor tool because you're exposing way too much product detail to a bunch of people that don't think like product people. And so what I've done in the past, when I've had to coordinate all of these outside teams according to my release calendar, is I've taken more of a release calendar approach. So this is actually a faux roadmap I use to coordinate 150 person go-to-market team at a job I worked at 7 or 8 years ago, where we were building e-commerce platforms. And it's really like at the high level platform and market vertical level. This is the rough order in which I am going to progress through developing major features and releasing them for large vertical segments of the market we serve. And you'll notice there are no timelines associated with any of this. We built the timelines on the fly, and we built them through active negotiation between product and the departments that were going to have to marshal resources. And the way we did it was we talked to those other teams about what was non-compressible in their timeline. Like, what are the lead times that you absolutely cannot squeeze for me? We'll work backwards from those dates. So marketing, if you're telling me you always have to know 6 months in advance of when something is available, we're going to have to figure out an agreeable middle ground where you may be early for things and things are done and they're sitting on the shelf waiting for me to get to a product release. But we're not going to fool ourselves into thinking that I'm going to hit a date 6 months out in the future and we're going to hang 14 other departments' activities off of that date. I find that that's a real easy way to get burned as a product manager. There's other instances too where you may be developing a really complicated product with a lot of development activity where those releases need to be coordinated. That's very different from what we do at Penta, where we're a 50-person company and we're all in on Scrum Agile, right? Some of you might be using Scaled Agile framework, which is really more of a project management methodology than it is a software development philosophy, the way Scrum Agile is. I get it. I understand when you need to do that type of stuff. Usually in those environments, though, there's plenty of people that are willing to help the product owner not only build the original plan, but keep iterating on it so that it's always up to date as things change. And then the last Top Gear presenter, the sentimentalist, Richard Hammond, right? I think the other tool we have in our toolkit that helps with road mapping is we all need to embrace emotion when selling the vision and when selling what we're going to go spend resources to work on. And I think when you're talking to stakeholders or people that really want to inspect the investment, leveraging your inner sentimentalist is a great way to get everybody bought in and trusting you as someone who's going to be on top of this constantly changing, chaotic environment in which the investment is going to get dropped into the product. And so one of the tools that we've used fairly successfully at Penta to sell that vision to the dev team and the stakeholders is this idea of like the soon, coming, and later style roadmap. And really, this is at a very high epic level, and it kind of articulates our vision for how we see the prioritization of the features. But again, you could see we typically try to stay away from dates. We're really just expressing prioritization to these people. But when we do it with a really healthy dose of salesmanship in order to get everybody bought into the fact that we're making consistently smart decisions about prioritization. And we understand that the business is investing significant amounts of money, time, and headspace. And they've trusted us as a product manager to be the steward of that investment as we bring things to a release. So how do we grab the wheel and sell this change inside businesses that have gotten used to the faux security of having this detailed roadmap? I think one, you got to stop wasting time planning for things that are unplannable, and you need to start selling the concept around your business that, software development is an uncertain thing. There's a reason why Agile is so popular. Taking a smaller slice of the problem and iterating it in these 2-week time cycles allows us to mitigate the risk given we know for a fact that a bunch of unplannable things are going to unfold throughout the software development cycle. Another thing you could do, get clear on that product vision, sell it with emotion, use your inner sentimentalist to do that sales pitch, and do it with everybody, right? For your business, for your users, for the teams you work with. I think tailoring your message to the audience. Going back to that slide where I talked about who is the audience for this roadmap and what do I want my roadmap to do with that audience allows you to get real clear on whether or not the roadmap is the best tool for the job given the particular audience segment. Aggressively confront the waste in your backlog, right? One of the things I do as an executive, I go around with the giant machete and cut backlogs in half on a regular basis for product managers that work in my company. When your backlog begins to get too cluttered, when it's extending too far out in the future with a bunch of things we all can agree you're never going to get to, it's just generating waste. And it's also creating like a weird mental headspace where everybody gets stressed out about all of these things that you're never going to get to. I find it's far better to just be honest and eliminate that waste in the backlog right off the bat. And then, one of the core fundamental tenets of the Agile Manifesto, I think, is really important. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools. I think road mapping has gotten too heavy in this discipline because of all the tools that exist. And I think people focus on the road mapping process and the tools for road mapping more than they do the interactions and the individuals that are consuming the roadmap as a deliverable. And then lastly, manage your contingencies and your options. Do not manage a plan. And that gets back to the Winston Churchill quote, right? The plan itself is not what's important. The act of planning is. And in that act of planning, you should be managing and mitigating the risk of the unexpected, right? We know that this isn't going to unfold exactly according to plan. What are we going to do when it doesn't, right? My example of working with the marketing team to negotiate their lead time and working backwards from that, part of that conversation would always include what's going to happen when I don't hit the date, when I miss it. What's the fallback plan with marketing? Am I going to jam you guys up too bad? Because if I am, let's just all agree right now that we have to come up with some contingency plans if that will happen, because there's some unspecified likelihood that it will in fact happen. I find that contingency planning and options planning is a far more valuable use of your time as a product manager than planning out the 6th or 7th or 8th month of a roadmap. And then, be honest about the conditions, because I don't think anybody has the expectation that product owners have the ability to predict the future. And so I'm going to stop there, and we're going to take some questions. And so, Matt, if you want to pop back in with Neve. Awesome.
Hey, Bill, that was great. Thank you. Lot to unpack there. And I know we've got some questions we definitely want to ask you. So I can lead off with one. And then if we have any questions filter in from the audience, we can take those as well. The first thing I wanted to start with you is you mentioned some product managers are using their roadmap kind of as a shield, right? To put it up there, have a stakeholder, for example, see that like, oh, good, there's a great granular plan that I can feel comfortable this product manager and team is going to hit, and I'll leave them alone for a while, right? And to me, that indicates like a level of defensiveness if a product manager is using a roadmap in that way, right? To kind of like, keep at bay folks that might be screaming in their ears. And I was wondering from your perspective, like speaking to the product managers that are watching this or will be watching it later, what advice do you have for them to identify defensive behavior generally? Like, are there other things that you've seen other than using the roadmap as a shield? And even if that's it, what advice would you give them to change that defensiveness? Like, what are the consequences of that, and what steps could I take to be less defensive in the environment I'm working in?
I think that is a fantastic question, and it strikes at one of the greatest challenges for product managers is this feeling that you're responsible for you're responsible for everything, but you don't have people that are functionally accountable to you. And so when I see product people acting defensively, what typically happens, and when I say typically, I mean like 95% of the time, the initial defensiveness starts this snowball effect where it rolls downhill and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And I'm going to give everybody a little bit of a tip, right? First off, identify when you're being defensive. An easy way to do that is after an interaction with people in the business, do you feel like you just got beat up? Because if you do, chances are basic human behavior is going to lead you to a defensive headspace. But the tip I want to give everybody about defensiveness is this idea that more data or more planning is somehow going to get the stakeholder off of your back. It's a fallacy. It's like straight up lie. And I could say this because I'm an executive stakeholder, and I will tell you that the vast majority of executive stakeholders like me that I interact with and have interacted with in my career, they're Jeremy Clarkson. They don't care about your charts and graphs. They usually don't care about your mountain of data that is supporting whatever it is you're trying to convince them of. The right way to engage those folks in a dialogue is to cut right to the heart of the matter, which is, why are you asking me this question? What are you concerned about? What are you seeing that you don't think I'm seeing? Because really the Jeremy Clarksons of this world that are in leadership positions that are making product people defensive, what they really want, even if they can't always clearly articulate it to you, is they want to live in a world where they feel they can trust your judgment to make decisions. And again, like I can tell you, a beautifully detailed, color-coded, categorized, tagged roadmap for most people that think like Jeremy Clarkson, their ears close and they just hear wah, 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 wah when you're talking about that type of stuff. It's far better to just cut right to the heart of the matter, be direct, tell them, hey, look, I feel like you don't think this is going particularly well. What can I do to get you more comfortable with the decisions we're making? Because I don't think there's any particular digital artifact that's going to be able to solve that problem between the two of us. And that's a hard thing to do. It requires you to let go of your defensiveness.
Great.
Awesome. So if I jump in with a question here for you, Bill. So it's hit at quite a good time for me because we're starting to think more about roadmaps and internal communication of those as well, and those different audiences inside that may want to see them. So whether it's the sales side, whether it's the development team, executive, etc. And I wondered whether you had any sort of tips or thoughts around that level of detail that you share, because we've fallen into the trap of not sharing enough. We've fallen into sharing too much. You know, not wanting to be like, here's the feature factory, here's all the things that we're ever going to build. And yeah, just wondered if you'd had any sort of tips around getting that balance of giving enough information frequently enough without it being an overload and folks wanting to engage with it.
It's like, I wish there was an easy button or some tip or trick. It's hard. I mean, that's the lion's share of the product person's responsibility in the organization. And I really think one of the reasons why the Top Gear analogy popped into my head for this presentation is being able to flex into these different personas as you're dealing with the challenge of being a modern product person gives you the ability to change your approach depending on the problem or the audience. And so I think, unfortunately, my gut response to your question is it depends, right? But I'll do more than that. I'll provide a little bit more detail. It depends on the audience. And it depends on what they need in order to stay focused and effective, right? And so, you know, your comment about feature factory, right, where we go 8 miles deep into everything that's going to be in the next release, the vast majority of people do not need that level of detail in order to discharge the responsibility of their role in your business. Unfortunately for you as a product person, what they do need is going to be very different depending on their role and responsibility in the organization. And guess what? It gets multiplied by the fact that different people have different personalities. And so really, I think, like, leverage your inner empath. We all should be good at this because that's really the pinnacle of being a product person, is understanding the jobs to be done of the users. All these people inside your organization are just more users to be thinking about. And if you can identify what their jobs to be done are fairly clearly and how they like to be communicated with, I think you'll find you'll have much more rich interactions with those people. And you'll probably find that you're using that feature factory roadmap placemat a lot less frequently in those conversations.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks, Bill. Your answer there was reminded me of a talk we had a couple of months ago from Connie Kwan, who was looking at like the different types of storytellers, and it was exactly kind of when you're talking to different people, it's less so what type of storyteller are you, it's right. How do the people that you're telling the story to listen, and like changing the direction of your communication based on that. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Right, that kind of leads me into like the next line of thinking that I was going down, Bill, is you have these three characters that you're using to kind of create the bar stool, the three-legged bar stool of product management that you need to flex in between, right? Jeremy being the entrepreneur, Hammond being the sentimentalist, and James May being the perfectionist, right? And I was going to ask you, well, you gave us the advice that, you know, you need to deploy Clarkson when your roadmap's longer than 6 months. If it's longer than that, you're going too far. You're planning for the sake of planning instead of planning to build a good product or communicate that. And so the question is, well, how do we know when we're being too much of a sentimentalist and too much of a perfectionist on the other two legs of the stool? But based on the answer you just gave, it sounds to me like, again, it's all dependent on the audience. As a product manager, you need to be able to flex between those and understand which one of those is appropriate for the situation and who you're speaking to. So as a statement instead of a question, would you agree with that? Do you have any like like your 6 months example with Clarkson,
Yeah,
examples for the sentimentalist or perfectionist?
I think as you were talking, the thing that popped into my head is that your roadmap is not a plan, right? Like I think everybody thinks it is. It's not. You know, and the way to think about, like, let's use the actual analogy of a roadmap, right? Back in the day, you used to get out the giant map that you would fold out and you would draw your route across the UK for your vacation to the beach. And you'd say, okay, great. Like, I'm going to follow that exactly to the letter. But now what do we all do? We type it into Google Maps and Google will reroute you. You make a wrong turn, they'll put you back on the path. If there's an accident up ahead, if there's a traffic camera, they'll let you know. I really do feel like even the 6 month example is extreme and probably way too far out in the future to say with any confidence that this is what's going to happen. Because if it does, if you're finding like, Bill, I don't know what you're talking about, everything I always put on my roadmap unfolds exactly according to plan, you're probably the type of person who's still using a paper map, who's going to get to the destination slower than the people that are using Google Maps, right? And so my advice for how to think about timeframes is as short as possible. Your plan should be an MVP. What is the minimum viable plan you need in order to keep the resources organized and moving forward? And then, you know, you might be uncomfortable with that. They may feel wild and crazy. Okay, fine. And start adding more time back into it. But start from the opposite end of wherever you're most comfortable. I think that's a great way to force you out of your comfort zone, maybe get you thinking a little bit differently about it.
Well, it sounds like at the core of what you're getting to, Bill, with what you just talked about there, is like the core of it is really trust, right? With higher levels of trust, the less amount of planning that's needed, because ultimately you just need the folks you're working with, whether that's an executive stakeholder or the person on your development team that's building the solution, to trust that you're making the right decisions to head in the direction of the highest possible value.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that's where individually tailoring the interaction to that person or that group of people is a far better tool for building the trust than some artificial fantasy plan that's never really going to happen. And I get why we all fall into a trap. I fall into it too, right? Like it's very comforting to plan out your future, right? And then, you know, you get punched in the face, or you blow up a release, or a bunch of developers decide to take a job with a different company, or sales shows up and there's a new competitor on the scene and nobody knew they were on the radar 3 months ago. Like, these are all the things that typically happen inside a modern software shop. And so, yeah, it's comforting, but it's also a fantasy exercise that's largely a waste of time, I think.
Oh, sorry, go on, Matt.
I was just going to jump to the comments. Janice asked a question in the comments that I think leads on with this conversation. So to take that to the extreme, right, where you've got extreme levels of trust, or radical question is, do you think as product management professionals, we should ditch the roadmap then?
I think that's hard, right? I think like that's a great question for you to ask yourselves and to ask the stakeholders you work with. I know that at Penta, we've gone through various iterations of this. We got wild and crazy. We had a director of product management that really wanted to plan everything out. He came from a much larger organization that ran scaled agile framework, and coordinating all of these different releases and all these different technology platforms. He really needed to have that plan. And you know what? That organization, they move a lot slower than my organization does. So they were able to comfortably pad all of those dates out into the future. And in the business that I run, we don't have the luxury of that kind of time. And so I'm okay if a product owner comes to me and says, you know what, I just want to organize my epics in a now, next, later, never categorization. Like, that's fine. And we're going to inspect the snot out of it every 2 weeks when we're in sprint reviews. And if I'm not feeling the trust that this thing is headed in the right direction and that we've got the appropriate amount of velocity and that we're iterating in the right types of chunks, I'm more than empowered to open my mouth about it. And so at Penta, yes, we have asked ourselves that question, and we've largely left the whole Gantt chart style time-bound road mapping exercise in the scrap bin for our business, and it doesn't really seem to be hurting us all that much. So it's another one of those it depends answers, but I like the aggressive nature of asking the question, and I think you all probably should ask the question first of yourself, and then of the people you work with, and then eventually your stakeholders, and see how they feel about it.
Awesome. Thanks, Bill. I was going to jump in with a quick question around communicating something like a roadmap or a plan. And I completely agree with that, like not wanting to go too far out, something that firm believer in, if we plan out 6 months, we're saying we're not going to learn anything new in the next 6 months. We know all the answers now, whereas, we're constantly learning, especially as product people. I wondered, do you at Penta, do you communicate your roadmap or things that are in the pipeline with customers? And if so, how is that managed where it's sort of a bit more iterative and not as far out as your 3 extra 6 months, even your 12 months?
Yeah, I'll even add an additional layer of complexity to your question, right? There's customers and then there's also partners, right? So some of us make products that we sell through a channel, right? That gets supported through a channel. Some of us have technology partnerships in place. And I do think it's important to communicate the plan to those people. But I think, again, the Churchill quote comes to mind. It's not about the plan, it's about the planning. And I've learned this the hard way. I've been burned by it so many times. I can't even total up the number of times it's happened to me in the 25 plus years I've been doing this. Every time I've tried to communicate a plan, something has not gone according to plan. And so what I do now is I bring those people into the planning so that they feel like they're a part of it. And it gives them an opportunity to learn just how complicated this is, right? So in my line of work, we work with construction companies. Most of the decision makers in construction companies get it because something like 60% of all construction projects run over budget and take longer than expected, right? So when you tell them, look, I could share the roadmap with you, but if we get into date-bound roadmap, and if dates are super critically important to you, here's what's going to end up happening. Iron triangle is a known concept in this world. It exists for a reason. The iron triangle says if I'm going to be date bound, I'm going to start removing features in order to hit the dates. Or if it's about the features and the value that I'm going to deliver, the dates need to be less important because I'm going to release when the features are totally built. And you just need to understand that that's the way this works. And so you're literally inviting them into the way you're thinking about the planning as opposed to doing a download of the quote unquote plan. And I found over time that I've gravitated towards doing that approach almost exclusively. I only share a detailed date-bound plan when I absolutely get boxed into a corner and have to.
Yeah.
So an extension to that topic then, Bill, is when you're involving folks in that planning, right, you've got a lot of different audiences that you could be considering. But if we focus on the stakeholder or investor for a moment, within that planning, like there can be planning from a feature perspective, as you mentioned. There could be planning from a business outcome or problem you're looking to solve perspective. So I wonder if you could just speak to us about the variability there and what you've seen work the best when you're talking to that stakeholder type audience in that planning approach versus here's the plan approach.
Yeah, I think the knowing your audience thing is absolutely critical when you start swimming in the shark tank with the stakeholders, right? Especially if there's outside money in the mix. I think getting a real good handle on how they're thinking about the investment enables you to communicate what you're doing with that investment in a way that makes sense to that person. Because typically most stakeholders, they're not putting 100% of their eggs in just your basket, in my experience, right? Most of these people are making bigger portfolio related decisions. And if you can communicate to them that you quote unquote get it, that you understand what they're looking to get out of the investment, you almost immediately become a member of the one less thing I have to worry about club, right? And so, when you use more of a VC example, like some VCs are absolutely consumed by the investment horizon. At what point do I need to get the money back at some type of multiple of what I invested? Other VCs are really consumed with what is the trend for the cash burn rate, because they're looking at the portfolio differently. It's more entrepreneurial. I need to keep this thing alive for another 3 months because at some point something good's going to happen. I think like those little critical nuances are really important things for a product decision maker to understand and internalize, because that's really what those stakeholders want to hear out of you is, hey, Chief, I get it. I understand that you're investing a lot in this product and in me, and you're trusting me to make smart decisions. And so one of the best ways that I'm going to make consistently smart decisions is I'm going to learn how you would make these decisions if you were me. And so uncovering those things as soon as humanly possible when you get put in charge of a product is absolutely critical if you want to successfully manage the interaction with the stakeholders.
Great. Thanks, Bill.
Awesome. Shall I jump in with another one, Matt? Is that all good time and wise?
Yeah, Neve, if you've got another one.
Cool. Okay, so one thing that you're sort of covering through the presentation area around, what the role of the product owner or product manager is, the planning out, the marketing, etc. And one thing I was thinking about is like, have you had an experience where sort of the product owner, product manager, a little bit ear to the floor is looking at what they're planning, what's coming next for that particular product that they're owning? It does kind of fit with the product vision side, what they've suggested, but actually it's not fitting with what the current organization or company objectives are. And so there's potentially the friction of, okay, but bottom up, this is very important, top down, a lot less important. Like, is that something that you've had to deal with before, and how have you sort of managed what then goes into the roadmap with that?
It happens a lot. So I'll go back 6 or 7 years. I was running a product part of a business that had multiple e-commerce platforms. And the CEO, it was a publicly traded company. The CEO was a former sales guy. The VP of sales was in every sprint review and roadmap review every 2 weeks with me. And those guys did not care one bit about technical debt. And the way this business grew was by buying pre-existing businesses. So I was managing a product portfolio of basically 8 products that all functionally did exactly the same thing, right? There was some minor variance in feature set, and customers were really stuck on the variances. So it was really difficult to migrate everybody to one platform to rule them all. And figuring out how to communicate to that audience the need to every 4 sprints, take a 2-week investment of hundreds of thousands of dollars and dedicate it towards chipping away at the giant mountain of technical debt was one of the more difficult things I was able to get done in the last 10 years of my career. And the way I did it was to not talk about it in terms of technical debt. Because the same way, I shared the advice earlier that most executive stakeholders don't want the details, and more details is not better for them. That particular audience, everything needed to be positioned through the lens of sales growth. Mm-hmm. And so what do? You start threatening those guys. You start threatening their revenue. Look, here's where the churn numbers are today. I've done the model. If we don't invest in eliminating technical debt from these platforms, because your salespeople don't have the ability to migrate these people to the more modern parts of the portfolio, we're going to start seeing that churn number inch up and to the right. And you could see pretty quickly that if we avoid the technical debt investment, the churn number pretty quickly is going to outpace whatever investment I'm asking for into tackling the technical debt. It's like it's a very simple bar napkin level financial calculation for a salesperson to wrap their brain around, but that's not typically the way a product person would position an investment in eliminating technical debt. It would be typically what I've seen in my career is a very technical discussion that's deep down in the rabbit hole of all the technical weeds. And at that point in my career, the people that I was talking to, there was just no way on earth that they were ever going to respond to that type of sales pitch. So I had to give them a pitch in a language that they understood.
Brilliant. So I guess that relates back to some of the earlier conversations we're having, like it's about the audience, it's about their jobs to be done, and frame what you want to drive forward in what matters, like personally what matters to them, because they can relate to that as opposed to, well, I see no need for completing this technical debt. This has nothing to do with my side of the business. Yeah, that makes complete sense. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that's hard given everything that we have to focus on as product people in our day jobs. One of the things I would recommend is like any opportunity you get to sit with those people when they're doing their job. It's just like going out into the field and watching people use your product. You learn a lot by being there and absorbing the environment in which those people are performing those jobs to be done. Like for me, it was really illuminating every quarter to jump on the quarterly earnings call with the analysts from Wall Street with our CEO and listen to the questions he was being asked, because now I know he has to answer these questions every 3 months. If I could take some of the things that I want him to think about and attach them up to the things that he gets raked over the coals for every 3 months, I'm going to really improve my statistical chances of having him respond positively to what I'm selling. And so it's one of those things where like, use the skills you've already developed to build great product and use them to really understand all these complex audiences you have to communicate to. And don't use the roadmap as the one-size-fits-all Swiss Army knife that is somehow magically going to facilitate all these conversations for you.
Great, thanks, Bill. We'll wrap up the Q&A section there and slide back over here to show the deck. So if anybody wants to continue the conversation with Bill, you can find him on LinkedIn, and I'm sure he'd be happy to continue the conversation with you. Also, if anyone is interested in checking out Top Gear, I found that it is on BBC iPlayer. If you're located in the UK, you can get from season 10, which is all the way back in 2007. So that'll feature the 3 hosts that Bill used as a example here today. Episode 2 of season 10, I would recommend as a great example of the personas that Bill used to illustrate the different perspectives of product management. That one was really good. But anyway, as you can see on the screen here, we're taking a break for the summer, so there won't be any ProductTank Birmingham in August, but we will be back in September, last Wednesday, back to our usual time slot in the month, and the last Wednesday of the month. We've got Roman Pickler coming in with an Ask Me Anything. Roman is a popular product management writer, blogger, and podcaster. His latest book, How to Lead in Product Management, is available now for anyone looking for some summer reading. Head over to romanpickler.com to start working ahead for September if you'd like. Hopefully, we'll see you then. If not, enjoy the summer and happy product management. Bye, everyone.
Brilliant. Bye, everyone.